Mr. Mayhern sat in court and listened to the damning story that the latter told. It was on the lines she had indicated to him in their interview. The prisoner reserved his defense and was committed for trial. Mr. Mayhern was at his wits' end. The case against Leonard Bull was black beyond words. Even the famous K.C. who was engaged for the defense held out little hope. "If we can shake that Austrian woman's testimony, we might do something," he said dubiously, "but it's a bad business." Mr. Mayhern had concentrated his energies on one single point. Assuming Leonard Bull to be speaking the truth, and to have left the murdered woman's house at 9 o'clock, who was the man Janet heard talking to Miss French at 9:30? The only ray of light was in the shape of a scapegrace nephew, who had in bygone days cajoled and threatened his aunt out of various sums of money. Janet Mackenzie, the solicitor learned, had always been attached to this young man, and had never ceased urging his claims upon her mistress. It certainly seemed possible that it was this nephew who had been with Miss French after Leonard Bull left, especially as he was not to be found in any of his old haunts. In all other directions, the lawyer's researches had been negative in the result. No one had seen Leonard Bull entering his own house or leaving that of Miss French. No one had seen any other man enter or leave the house in Cricklewood. All inquiries drew blank. It was in the eve of the trial when Mr. Mayhern received the letter which was to lead his thoughts in an entirely new direction. It came by the 6 o'clock post. An illiterate scrawl written on common paper and enclosed in a dirty envelope with the stamp stuck on crooked. Mr. Mayhern read it through once or twice before he grasped its meaning. "Dear Mister, you're the lawyer chap wot acts for the young fella. I want that painted foreign hussy showed up for what she is and her pack of lies. You come to 16 Shaw's Rent, Stepney, tonight. It'll cost you 200 quid. Arsk for Mrs. Mogson." The solicitor read and reread this strange epistle. It might, of course, be a hoax, but when he thought it over, he became increasingly convinced that it was genuine, and also convinced him that it was the one hope for the prisoner. The evidence of Romaine Heigler damned him completely, and the line the defense meant to pursue, the line that the evidence of a woman who had admittedly lived an immoral life was not to be trusted, was at best a weak one. Mr. Mayhern's mind was made up. It was his duty to save his client at all costs. He must go to Shaw's Rents. He had some difficulty in finding the place, a ramshackle building in an evil-smelling slum, but at last he did so, and on inquiry for Mrs. Mogson was sent up to a room on the 3rd floor. On this door he knocked, and getting no answer, knocked again. At this second knock he heard a shuffling sound inside, and presently the door was opened cautiously half an inch, and a bent figure peered out. Suddenly the woman, for it was a woman, gave a chuckle and opened the door wider. "So it is you, dearie," she said in a wheezy voice. "Nobody with you, is there? No playing tricks? That's right. You can come in. You can come in." With some reluctance, the lawyer stepped across the threshold into the small, dirty room with its flickering gas jet. There was an untidy, unmade bed in a corner, a plain deal table, and 2 rickety chairs. For the first time, Mr. Mayhern had a full view of the tenant of this unsavory apartment. She was a woman of middle age, bent in figure, with a mass of untidy gray hair and a scarf wound tightly round her face. She saw him looking at this and laughed again, the same curious, toneless chuckle. "Wondering why I hide my beauty, dear? Afraid it may tempt you? But you shall see, you shall see." She drew aside the scarf, and the lawyer recoiled involuntarily before the almost formless blur of scarlet. She replaced the scarf again. "So you're not wanting to kiss me, dearie? I don't wonder. And yet I was a pretty girl once. Not so long ago as you think, either. Vitriol, dearie, vitriol. That's what did that. But I'll be even with 'em." She burst into a hideous torrent of profanity, which Mr. Mayhern tried vainly to quell. She fell silent at last, her hands clenching and unclenching themselves nervously. "Enough of that," said the lawyer sternly. "I have come here because I have reason to believe you can give me information which will clear my client, Leonard Bull. Is that the case?" Her eyes leered at him cunningly. "What about the money, dearie?" she wheezed. 200 quid, you remember. "It is your duty to give evidence, and you can be called upon to do so." "That won't do, dearie. I'm an old woman, and I know nothing. But you give me 200 quid, and perhaps I can give you a hint or two. See?" "What kind of hint?" "What should you say to a letter? A letter from her. Never mind how I got hold of it. That's my business. It'll do the trick, but I want my 200 quid." Mr. Mayhern looked at her coldly and made up his mind. "I'll give you £10, nothing more, and only that if this letter is what you say it is." "£10?" she screamed, and raved at him. "20," said Mr. Mayhern, "and that's my last word." He rose as if to go, then, watching her closely, he drew out a pocket-book and counted out 21-pound notes. "You see," he said, "this is all I have with me. You can take it or leave it." But already he knew that the sight of the money was too much for her. She cursed and raved impotently, but at last she gave in. Going over to the bed, she drew something out from beneath the tattered mattress. Here you are, damn you, she snarled. It's the top one you want. It was a bundle of letters that she threw to him, and Mr. Mayhern untied them and scanned them in his usual cool, methodical manner. The woman, watching him eagerly, could gain no clue from his impassive face. He read each letter through, then returned again to the top one and read it a second time. Then he tied the whole bundle up again carefully. They were love letters, written by Romain Helger, and the man they were written to was not Leonard Bull. The top letter was dated the day of the latter's arrest. I spoke true, dearie, didn't I? It'll do for her, that letter. Mr. Mayhern put the letters in his pocket, then he asked a question. How did you get hold of this correspondence? That's telling, she said with a leer, but I know something more. I heard in court what that hussy said. Find out where she was at 20 past 10, the time she says she was at home. Ask at the Lion Road Cinema. They'll remember. A fine, upstanding girl like that. Curse her. Who is the man? Asked Mr. Mayhern. There's only a Christian name here. The other's voice grew thick and hoarse, her hands clenched and unclenched. Finally, she lifted one to her face. He's the man that did this to me. Many years ago now. She took him away from me, a chit of a girl she was then, and when I went after him, and went for him too, she threw the cursed stuff at me. And she laughed. Damn her. I've had it in for her for years. Followed her, I have, spied upon her, and now I've got her. She'll suffer for this, won't she, Mr. Lawyer? She'll suffer. She will probably be sentenced to a term of imprisonment for perjury, said Mr. Mayhern quietly. Shut away. That's what I want. You're going, are you? Where's my money? Where's that good money? Without a word, Mr. Mayhern put down the notes on the table. Then, drawing a deep breath, he turned and left the squalid room. Looking back, he saw the old woman crooning over the money. He wasted no time. He found the cinema in Lion Road easily enough, and shown a photograph of Romain Helger, the commissionaire recognized her at once. She had arrived at the cinema with a man some time after 10 o'clock on the evening in question. He had not noticed her escort particularly, but he remembered the lady who had spoken to him about the picture that was showing. They stayed until the end, about an hour later. Mr. Mayhern was satisfied. Romain Helger's evidence was a tissue of lies from beginning to end. She had evolved it out of her passionate hatred. The lawyer wondered whether he would ever know what lay behind that hatred. What had Leonard Bull done to her? He had seemed dumbfounded when the solicitor had reported her attitude to him. He had declared earnestly that such a thing was incredible. Yet it had seemed to Mr. Mayhern that after the first astonishment his protests had lacked sincerity. He did not know. He did know. Mr. Mayhern was convinced of it. He knew, but he had no intention of revealing the fact. The secret between those two remained a secret. Mr. Mayhern wondered if some day he should come to learn what it was. The solicitor glanced at his watch. It was late, but time was everything. He hailed a taxi and gave an address. Sir Charles must know of this at once, he murmured to himself as he got in. The trial of Leonard Bull for the murder of Emily French aroused widespread interest. In the first place, the prisoner was young and good-looking. Then he was accused of a particularly dastardly crime, and there was the further interest of Romain Helger, the principal witness for the prosecution. There had been pictures of her in many papers, and several fictitious stories as to her origin and history. The proceedings opened quietly enough. Various technical evidence came first. Then Janet Mackenzie was called. She told substantially the same story as before. In cross-examination, counsel for the defense succeeded in getting her to contradict herself once or twice over her account of Bull's association with Miss French. He emphasized the fact that though she had heard a man's voice in the sitting room that night, there was nothing to show that it was Bull who was there. He managed to drive home a feeling that jealousy and dislike of the prisoner were at the bottom of a good deal of her evidence. Then the next witness was called. Your name is Romain Helger? Yes. You were an Austrian subject? Yes. For the last 3 years you have lived with the prisoner and passed yourself off as his wife. Just for a moment, Romain Helger's eyes met those of the man in the dock. Her expression held something curious and unfathomable. Yes. The questions went on. Word by word, the damning facts came out. On the night in question, the prisoner had taken out a crowbar with him. He had returned at 20 minutes past 10 and had confessed to have killing the old lady. His cuffs had been stained with blood, and he had burned them in the kitchen stove. He had terrorized her into silence by means of threats. As the story proceeded, the feeling of the court, which had, to begin with, been slightly favorable to the prisoner, now sat dead against him. He himself sat with downcast head and moody air, as though he knew he were doomed. Yet it might have been noted that her own counsel sought to restrain Romain's animosity. He would have preferred her to be more unbiased. Formidable and ponderous, counsel for the defense arose. He put it to her that her story was a malicious fabrication from start to finish, that she had not even been in her own house at the time in question, that she was in love with another man and was deliberately seeking to send Bull to his death for a crime he did not commit. Romain denied these allegations with superb insolence. Then came the surprising denouement, the production of the letter. It was read aloud in court in the midst of a breathless stillness. Max, beloved, the fates have delivered him into our hands. He has been arrested for murder. But yes, the murder of an old lady. Leonard, who would not hurt a fly. At last I shall have my revenge. The poor chicken. I shall say that he came in that night with blood upon him, that he confessed to me. I shall hang him, Max, and when he hangs he will know and realize that it was Romayne who sent him to his death. And then, happiness, beloved, happiness at last. There were experts present ready to swear that the handwriting was that of Romayne Halger, but they were not needed. Confronted with the letter, Romayne broke down utterly and confessed everything. Leonard Vole had returned to the house at the time, he said, 9:20. She had invented the whole story to ruin him. With the collapse of Romayne Halger, the case for the Crown collapsed also. Sir Charles called his few witnesses. The prisoner himself went into the box and told his story in a manly, straightforward manner, unshaken by cross-examination. The prosecution endeavored to rally, but without great success. The judge's summing up was not wholly favorable to the prisoner, but a reaction had set in, and the jury needed little time to consider their verdict. We find the prisoner not guilty. Leonard Vole was free. Little Mr. Mayhern hurried from his seat. He must congratulate his client. He found himself polishing his pince nez vigorously and checked himself. His wife had told him only the night before that he was getting a habit of it. Curious things, habits. People themselves never knew they had them. An interesting case, a very interesting case. That woman, now Romayne Halger. The case was dominated for him still by the exotic figure of Romayne Halger. She had seemed a pale, quiet woman in the house at Paddington, but in court she had flamed out against the sober background, flaunting herself like a tropical flower. If he closed his eyes, he could see her now, tall and vehement, her exquisite body bent forward a little, her right hand clenching and unclenching itself unconsciously all the time. Curious things, habits. That gesture of hers with the hand was her habit, he supposed. Yet he had seen someone else do it quite lately. Who was it now? Quite lately. He drew in his breath with a gasp as it came back to him. The woman in Shaw's Rent. He stood still, his head whirring. It was impossible. Impossible. Yet Romayne Halger was an actress. The Casey came up behind him and clapped him on the shoulder. Congratulated our man yet? He's had a narrow shave, you know. Come along and see him. But the little lawyer shook off the other's hand. He wanted only one thing, to see Romayne Halger face to face. He did not see her until some time later, and the place of their meeting is not relevant. So you guessed, she said, when he had told her all that was in his mind. The face? Oh, that was easy enough, and the light of that gas jet was too bad for you to see the makeup. But why? Why? Why did I play a lone hand? She smiled a little, remembering the last time she had used the words. Such an elaborate comedy. My friend, I had to save him. The evidence of a woman devoted to him would not have been enough. You hinted as much yourself. But I know something of the psychology of crowds. Let my evidence be wrung from me as an admission, damning me in the eyes of the law, and a reaction in favor of the prisoner would immediately set in. And the bundle of letters? One alone, the vital one, might have seemed like a what do you call it, put-up job. Then the man called Max? Never existed, my friend. I still think, said little Mr. Mayhern in an aggrieved manner, that we could have got him off by the normal procedure. I dared not risk it. You see, you thought he was innocent. And you knew it? I see, said little Mr. Mayhern. My dear Mr. Mayhern, said Romayne, you do not see at all. I knew. He was guilty. Okay, so there's our story. After you read/listen or just read the story, you are going to have to answer some questions here. These are all going to be on Google Classroom. So you can go through and answer these while you read. But then that's all we'll be doing, okay, for this story. So read it, questions, and then you're good to go.